Now, Donald Corter wasn't in New York for the Tartan Day parade. Neither was I. Not sure I'd have gone on it anyway. But with a name like Donald, you must have Scottish roots. Donald, very good to see you again. You're a bit of a Scarlet Pimpernel. You were in Pyongyang again. Tell us about that first. What's the atmosphere there like?
Well, George, I do have Scottish roots, actually, and my trip to the DPRK, the second one I've ever made, surprisingly as an American citizen, it was amazing. I mean, I was there last time in June of last year, so about half a year has passed, and they've already built a new road through the main part of the city. There's already new construction projects all over the place, something that I also saw on my first trip there as well. They showed us some of the new apartment complexes that are given to people free of charge in the capital of the DPRK that everybody in the West says is just in poverty and starving, while people in the United States, are paying tons of money to live in a cardboard box in New York just to survive. And people are saying that that's the American dream, That obviously is one of the main things that always surprises me when I go back to the DPRK. But, they're holding strong, and their economy is not nearly as backwards as much of the Western propaganda claims it is. They're holding their own, and they're now strategic partners with Russia, which is giving them a lot of, obviously, advantages in the economic sphere, defense sphere, diplomatic sphere. And, Sergei Shoigu, the former defense minister of Russia, he went to the DPRK. That's where who I was going with. I was covering his visit. And he actually met with Kim Jong-un to discuss further deepening cooperation in the sphere of defense and probably a lot of other stuff that isn't available to the public. So some high-level stuff going on between Russia and the DPRK right now, while, in the West, we're seeing basically these old allies caving in each other, with the tariff war starting.
Yeah, I want to ask you about them, Donald. I don't know how big you are on the tariff question, but on the face of it, let me make my own politics clear. If I was running Britain, I'd have import controls to protect my own domestic industry. I would have preferences that all public service goods and services would have to be procured from Britain. That's the kind of old-fashioned socialist that I am. How different is Trump's idea to that?
Well, I agree with you, George, in that respect. In the abstract, I think it's a good idea. But I think in the context of this monstrous globalist system that the capitalist class has created since the fall of the Soviet Union, in the context of that, we're looking at radical changes to the system that are likely going to end up in a lot of, I think, bad feelings between different Western leaders that were previously considered to be part of the collective West, and a real serious possibility for, or an increased possibility rather, for a global recession in Western economies. But again, as someone who's in Russia right now, I live in Moscow full time. For any viewers that don't know that, it's almost as if the sanctions that were launched against Russia 3 years ago were sort of God-sent. Now Russia's really detached much more from the Western economy than it was before the military operation began. All these Western companies left, and they were replaced by Russian ones, and the Russian economy is still around, alive and kicking, without just much more independent from Western economics than it used to be. So if there is some sort of serious global recession in the Western economies because of this tariff war, as they're calling it in the West. And that is a possibility because, of course, we know there was a lot of protectionism around the Great Depression and everything. But if that happens, Russia's not even going to be that affected as it would have been, say, 5-6 years ago.
What do you think of the visit to Washington of the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund? On one reading, that seems like talks between Russia and the US are at quite an advanced level. I mean, this was not, presumably, a discussion about the battlefield, but a discussion about what happens after the war.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's important to understand, first of all, that this is the first major visit by a high-level politician from Russia involving multi-day negotiations that were very productive that we've seen since before the military operation even began. So this is obviously, like you said, I mean, it's a big step forward in terms of reviving relations diplomatically between the United States and Russia. But what I have to say in terms of the whole hope and optimism that we've been seeing since Trump, you know, held out an olive branch to Putin in the Ukraine conflict and everything, we've seen a lot of good stuff in terms of, you know, the U.S. and Russia talking and everything, but I think we've seen so far very little practical outcomes from it. I mean, the one, probably the most significant thing that we've seen so far was that Putin and Trump, of course, called up on the phone and they agreed to establish a energy infrastructure ceasefire effective immediately. But the Ukrainians happen to be violating that ceasefire every single day. And it's not really that surprising, of course, that the Ukrainians are trying to sabotage this process, because right now they're in no position to be negotiating and coming out in a good position. I mean, from the beginning, to think that Ukraine could have fought Russia and succeeded and taken back Crimea, I mean, this is an absolutely crazy idea. It always has been, but right now, Ukraine's losing on the battlefield day after day. They had that formerly successful offensive in the Kursk region. Now they're basically out of there. I mean, after Russia's pipeline offensive, there are advances in the Donetsk region day by day. We're always hearing about this in the news. So, I mean, there was even a report by The Independent recently that the Ukrainians are getting so desperate to mobilize more people that we're seeing, on the one hand, videos coming out of ordinary Ukrainians actually coming to the rescue of other Ukrainians that are being kidnapped by the recruitment authorities, and they're stopping that from happening. So mobilization's not going well. And to counteract the fact that mobilization's not going well, we're seeing tons of soldiers come back from, Ukrainian soldiers come back from the front line injured with PTSD. And there's a tendency in Ukraine right now where they're drugging them up with ketamine and animal tranquilizers and trying to make them fit enough to be sent right back to the front, even though that they're, you know, injured or they were just there. And so it's a complete nightmare. And the Kiev regime is just dedicated to continuing this bloodshed regardless of all of that. So I think because of that factor, that is basically the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle that this thawing of relations between Russia and the United States is facing right now. The fact that Ukraine's trying to sabotage it. So, I mean, we're going to have to see how far that continues. I mean, so far, that's pretty much the only concrete thing we've seen come out of this thaw. And we'll have to see when Trump and Putin are going to meet up in Saudi Arabia, as they've said for some time. So we'll have to see.
Well, not just the Ukrainians are seeking to sabotage it, of course. The Europeans are doing everything they can. Now, I have read for a punishment, I read the granular, prolix prose of the New York Times deep dive into what this war has all been about. I fell asleep a couple of times, as one does with the New York Times, but I have read it, and I have read the much punchier and much better article on the Grey Zone today by my friend Kit Clarenberg, which narrows down and drills down on what is there in the New York Times piece. And what it reveals, Donald, is this has been a very British war, and that the Kursk disaster is a very British disaster. How acutely aware of that are they in Moscow?
I think very much so. I mean, the derogatory term for Western enemies in Russia has become the Anglo-Saxons because of just how much of a hand the UK, the MI6, all different sorts of authorities connected to Great Britain have been involved in Ukraine since, before the Russian military operation even began. I mean, it seems like to me also, in terms of all of the European powers, the United Kingdom seems to be the most anti-Russian throughout this entire thing. I mean, I know a friend, I know a guy who's one of my friends who's right now in Donbass. His name is Ben Stimson, and he's serving as an engineer in the Russian military in the SMO. And he actually went to volunteer in for the People's Militias, but when Lugansk and Donetsk were still independent People's Republics. And he came back to the UK in 2015, and they put him in Belmarsh prison for terrorism. He spent almost 7 years in Belmarsh prison, the same prison where they put Julian Assange. And so that's absolutely insane. Obviously, once he was able to get out, he ran right back to Russia, signed a military contract so he could get citizenship in Russia, and that's how the situation is now. But for Russians, the UK is probably the most hostile place right now, and that's part and parcel in connection to just the stance that the British government has taken throughout its various administrations, its various prime ministers. Everything has been pretty steady, that they've been anti-Russian, and they want to see the Ukraine bloodshed continue. And they've been doing everything possible, sending military aid, espionage assistance to the Ukrainian government, and a lot of other things.
Well, you've shocked me about your friend, Mr. Simpson. I wonder if he's in any way able to come on the show. It would be very interesting to talk to him. But this hatred, this peculiar and ancient and frankly inexplicable hatred from the British to the Russians, it takes some getting your head round. There are some fools who think it's all about Putin. But of course, it predates Putin, it predates the Bolsheviks. It goes back to the middle of the 19th century, or even further. How do people in Russia see that? Is that historic enmity, irrespective of whether it's a Tsar or the Bolsheviks or Putin in charge? The hatred, implacable, continues.
Well, I think, a lot of people see it that way, but, people remember more of these events that are in recent memory. Of course, we've got everything connected to the military operation now as well, but we've also got the sort of hostility that the UK showed towards the Soviet Union during Soviet times in the 20th century. I mean, we had there's plenty of British espionage going on, or British-supported espionage going on in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, 1930s that they called the War Scare at that time. I mean, Winston Churchill wanted to use experimental chemical weapons against the Bolsheviks. So, but like you said, it does go farther back than that. And I think a lot of people do have a sense of that, especially because obviously it's not the Soviet Union anymore, and the Putin administration tries to take a wider scope in terms of its presentation of how history is related to the current day. That's why a lot of the times we hear Maria Zakharova talking about Anglo-Saxons or Sergei Lavrov, because it does seem to be some sort of deeply rooted, pretty much national hatred of the British government against Russia as a nation that's gone back a long time. Yeah.